Ender came in the door, still wet from his last dip in the lake. It was dark outside, and dark in the room where Graf waited for him. "Are we going now?" asked Ender. "If you want to," Graf said. "When?" "When you're ready." Ender showered and dressed. He was finally used to the way civilian clothes fit together, but he still didn't feel right without a uniform or a flash suit. "I'll never wear a flash suit again," he thought. "That was a battle school game, and I'm through with that." He heard the crickets chirping madly in the woods. In the near distance he heard the crackling sound of a car driving slowly on gravel. What else should he take with him? He had read several of the books in the library, but they belonged to the house, and he couldn't take them. The only thing he owned was the raft he had made with his own hands. That would stay here too. The lights were on now in the room where Graf waited. He too had changed clothing. He was back in uniform. They sat in the back seat of the car together, driving along country roads to come at the airport from the back. "Back when the population was growing," said Graf, "they kept this area in woods and farms. Watershed land. The rainfall here starts a lot of the rivers flowing, a lot of the underground water moving around. The earth is deep, and right to the heart it's alive, Ender. We people only live on top, like the bugs that live on the scum of the still water near the shore." Ender said nothing. "We train our commanders the way we do because that's what it takes. They have to think certain ways. They can't be distracted by a lot of things, so we isolate them. Keep you separate. And it works. But it's so easy when you never meet people. When you never know the earth itself. When you live with metal walls keeping out the cold of space. It's easy to forget why Earth is worth saving. Why the world of people might be worth the price you pay." "So that's why you brought me here?" thought Ender. "With all your hurry, that's why you took 3 months to make me love Earth? Well, it worked. All your tricks worked. Valentine, too. She was another one of your tricks to make me remember that I'm not going to school for myself. Well, I remember." "I may have used Valentine," said Graf, "and you may hate me for it, Ender, but keep in mind, it only works because what's between you, that's real. That's what matters. Billions of those connections between human beings. That's what you're fighting to keep alive." Ender turned his face to the window and watched the helicopters and dirigibles rise and fall. They took a helicopter to the IF spaceport at Stumpy Point. It was officially named for a dead hegemon, but everybody called it Stumpy Point after the pitiful little town that had been paved over, where they made the approaches to the vast islands of steel and concrete that dotted Pamlico Sound. There were still water birds taking their fastidious little steps in the salt water, where mossy trees dripped down as if to drink. It began to rain lightly, and the concrete was black and slick. It was hard to tell where it left off and the sound began. Graf led him through a maze of clearances. Authority was a little plastic ball that Graf carried. He dropped it into chutes, and doors opened, and people stood up and saluted, and the chutes spat out the ball, and Graf went on. Ender noticed at first that everyone first watched Graf, but as they penetrated deeper into the spaceport, people began watching Ender. At first it was the man of real authority they noticed, but later, where everyone had authority, it was his cargo they cared to see. Only when Graf strapped himself to the shuttle seat beside Ender did Ender realize Graf was going to launch with him. "How far?" Ender asked. "How far are you going with me?" Graf smiled thinly. "All the way, Ender." "Are they making you administrator of command school?" "No." So they had removed Graf from his post at battle school solely to accompany Ender to his next assignment. How important am I? He wondered. And like a whisper of Peter's voice inside his mind, he heard the question, how can I use this? He shuddered and tried to think of something else. Peter could have fantasies about ruling the world, but Ender didn't have them. Still thinking back on his life in battle school, it occurred to him that although he had never sought power, he had always had it. But he decided that it was a power born of excellence, not manipulation. He had no reason to be ashamed of it. He had never, except perhaps with Bean, used his power to hurt someone, and with Bean things had worked well after all. Bean had become a friend, finally to take the place of the lost ally, who in turn took the place of Valentine. Valentine was helping Peter in his plotting. Valentine, who still loved Ender no matter what happened. And following that train of thought led him back to Earth, back to the quiet hours in the center of the clear water ringed by a bowl of tree-covered hills. That is the Earth, he thought, not a globe of thousands of kilometers around, but a forest with a shining lake, a house hidden at the crest of a hill, high in the trees, a grassy slope leading upward from the water, fish leaping and birds strafing to take the bugs that lived in the border between water and sky. Earth was the constant noise of crickets and winds of birds, and the voice of a girl who spoke to him out of his far-off childhood. The same voice that had once protected him from terror. The same voice that he would do anything to keep alive, even return to school, even leave Earth behind again for another 40 or 44,000 years, even if she loved Peter more. His eyes were still closed, and he had not made any sound but breathing. Still, Graf reached out and touched his hand across the aisle. Ender stiffened in surprise, and Graf soon withdrew. But for a moment, Ender was struck with the startling thought that perhaps Graf felt some affection for him. But no, it was just another calculated gesture. Graf was creating a commander out of a little boy. No doubt Unit 17 in the course studies included an affectionate gesture from a teacher. The shuttle reached the IPL satellite in only a few hours. Interplanetary Launch was a city of 3,000 inhabitants, breathing oxygen from the plants that also fed them, drinking water that had already passed through their bodies 10,000 times, living only to service the tugs that did all the ox work in the solar system and the shuttles that took their cargoes and passengers back to Earth or the moon. It was a world where, briefly, Enter felt at home, since its floor sloped upwards as they did in the battle school. Their tug was fairly new. The IF was constantly casting off its old vehicles and purchasing the latest models. It had just brought a vast load of drawn steel processed by a factory ship that was taking apart minor planets in the asteroid belt. The steel would be dropped to the moon, and now the tug was linked to 14 barges. Graf dropped his ball into the reader again, however, and the barges were uncoupled from the tug. It would be making a fast run this time to a destination of Graf's specification, not to be stated until the tug had cut loose from its IPL. "It's no great secret," said the tug's captain. "Whenever the destination is unknown, it's for ISL." But the analogy with IPL, Ender decided, the letters meant interstellar launch. "What time is it?" "What time it isn't." "This time it isn't," said Graf. "Where then?" "IF command." "I don't have security clearance even to know where that is, sir." "Your ship knows," said Graf. "Just let the computer have a look at this, and follow the course it plots." He handed the captain a plastic ball. "And I'm supposed to close my eyes during the whole voyage so I don't figure out where we are?" "Oh no, of course not. IF command is on the minor planet Eros, which should be about 3 months away from here at the highest possible speed, which is the speed you'll use, of course." "Eros? But I thought that the buggers burned that to a radioactive—" "Ah. When did I receive security clearance to know this?" "You didn't, so when we arrive at Eros you will undoubtedly be assigned to permanent duty there." The captain understood immediately and didn't like it. "I'm a pilot, you son of a bitch, and you got no right to lock me up on a rock." "I will overlook your derisive language to a superior officer. I do apologize, but my orders were to take the fastest available military tug. At the moment I arrived, that was you. And it isn't as though anyone were out to get you. Cheer up. The war may be over in another 15 years, and then the location of IF command won't have to be a secret anymore. By the way, you should be aware, in case you're one of those who relies on visuals for docking, that Eros has been blacked out. Its albedo is only slightly brighter than a black hole. You won't see it." "Thanks," said the captain. It was nearly a month into the voyage before he managed to speak civilly to Colonel Graf. The shipboard computer had a limited library, so it was geared primarily to entertainment rather than education. So during the voyage, after breakfast and morning exercises, Enter and Graf would usually talk. About command school, about Earth, about astronomy and physics, and whatever Ender wanted to know. And above all, he wanted to know about the buggers. "We don't know much," said Graff. "We've never had a live one in custody. Even when we caught one unarmed and alive, it died the moment it became obvious he was captured. And even the he is uncertain. The most likely thing, in fact, is that most bugger soldiers are females, but with atrophied or vestigial sexual organs. We can't tell. It's their psychology that would be most useful to you, and we haven't exactly had a chance to interview them. Tell me what you know, and maybe I'll learn something that I need." So Graff told him. The buggers were organisms that could conceivably have evolved on Earth if things had gone a different way a billion years ago. At the molecular level, there were no surprises. Even the genetic material was the same. It was no accident that they looked insect-like to human beings, though their internal organs were now much more complex and specialized than any insects, and they had evolved an internal skeleton and shed most of the exoskeleton. Their physical structures still echoed their ancestors, who could easily have been very much like Earth's ants. "But don't be fooled like that," said Graff. "It's just as meaningful to say that our ancestors could easily have been very much like squirrels." "If that's all we have to go on, that's something," said Ender. "Squirrels never built starships," said Graff. "There are usually a few changes on the way, from gathering nuts and seeds to harvesting asteroids and putting permanent research stations on the moons of Saturn. The buggers could probably see about the same spectrum of light as human beings, and there was artificial lighting in their ships and ground installations. However, their antennae seemed almost vestigial. There was no evidence from their bodies that smelling, tasting, or hearing were particularly important to them. Of course, we can't be sure, but we can't see anyway that they could have used sound for communication. The oddest thing of all was that they also don't have any communication devices on their ships. No radios, nothing that could transmit or receive any kind of signal. They communicate ship to ship. I've seen the videos. They talk to each other. True, but body to body, mind to mind. It's the most important thing we learn from them. Their communication, however they do it, is instantaneous. Light speed is no barrier. When Mazer Rackham defeated their invasion fleet, they closed up shop at once. There was no time for a signal. Everything just stopped. Ender remembered the videos of uninjured buggers lying dead at their posts. "We knew then that it was possible to communicate faster than light. That was 70 years ago, and once we knew what could be done, we did it. Not me, mind you. I wasn't born then." "How is it possible?" "I can't explain philodic physics to you. Half of it nobody understands anyway. What matters is that we built the Ansible. The official name is Philodic Parallax Instantaneous Communicator, but somebody dredged the name Ansible out of an old book somewhere, and it caught on. Not that most people even know the machine exists." "That means the ships could talk to each other even when they were across the solar system," said Ender. "It means," said Graff, "that ships could talk to each other even when they're across the galaxy, and the buggers can do it without machines." "So they knew about their defeat the moment it happened," said Ender. "I always figured, everybody always said that they probably only found out they lost the battle 25 years ago." "It keeps people from panicking," said Graff. "I'm telling you things that you can't know, by the way, if you're ever going to leave IF Command, before the war is over." Ender was angry. "If you know me at all, you know I can't keep a secret. It's a regulation. People under 25 are assumed to be a security risk. It's very unjust to a good many responsible children, but it helps narrow the number of people who might let something slip." "What's all the secrecy for, anyway?" "Because we've taken some terrible risks, Ender, and we don't want to have every net on the earth second-guessing those decisions. You see, as soon as we had a working Ansible, we tucked it into our best starships and launched them to attack the buggers' home systems. Do we know where they are? Yes. So we're not waiting for the third invasion. We are the third invasion. We're attacking them. Nobody says that. Everybody thinks we have a huge fleet of warships waiting in the Comet Shield. Not one. We're quite defenseless here. What if they sent a fleet to attack us? Then we're dead. But our ships haven't seen such a fleet. Not a sign of one. Maybe they gave up and they're planning to leave us alone. Maybe. You've seen the videos. Would you bet the human race on a chance of them giving up and leaving us alone? Ender tried to grasp the amount of times that had gone by, and the ships have been traveling for 70 years. Some of them, and some for 30 years, and some for 20. We make better ships now. We're learning how to play with space a little better. But every starship that is not still under construction is on its way to a bugger world or outpost. Every starship with cruisers and fighters tucked into its belly is out there approaching the buggers, decelerating because they're almost there. The first ships we sent to the most distant objectives, the most recent ships to the closer ones. Our timing was pretty good. They'll all be arriving in combat range within a few months of each other. Unfortunately, our most primitive, outdated equipment will be attacking their home world. Still, they're armed well enough. We have some weapons the buggers never saw before. When will they arrive? Within the next 5 years, Ender. Everything is ready at IF command. The Master Ansible is there, in contact with all our invasion fleet. The ships are all working, ready to fight. All we lack, Ender, is the battle commander. Someone who knows what the hell to do with those ships when they get there. And what if no one knows what to do with them? We'll just do our best with the best commander we can get. Me, thought Ender. They want me to be ready in 5 years. Colonel Graff, there isn't a chance I'll be ready to command a fleet. Graff shrugged. So, do your best. If you aren't ready, we'll make do with what we've got. That eased Ender's mind, but only for a moment. Of course, Ender, what we've got right now is nobody. Ender knew that this was another of Graff's games. Make me believe that it all depends on me so I can't slack off, so I push myself as hard as possible. Game or not, though, it might also be true, and he would work as hard as possible. It was what Val had wanted for him. 5 years. Only 5 years until the fleet arrives, and I don't know anything yet. I'll only be 15 in 5 years, Ender said. Going on 16, said Graff. It all depends on what you know. Colonel Graff, he said, I just want to go back and swim in the lake. After we win the war, said Graff, or lose it, we'll have a few decades before they get back here to finish us off. The house will be there, and I promise you can swim to your heart's content. But I'll be too young for a security clearance. We'll keep you under armed guards at all times. The military knows how to handle these things. They both laughed, and Ender had to remind himself that Graff was only acting like a friend, that everything he did was a lie or a cheat calculated to turn Ender into an efficient fighting machine. I'll become exactly the tool you want me to be, said Ender silently, but at least I won't be fooled into it. I'll do it because I choose to, not because you tricked me, you sly bastard.